Right there?
It's on live now.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna call Pete now. Let's see here. Pete Devnall.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Is this in?
Should I let her in?
Yeah.
Okay. But then she's going to want to get out.
Well.
Here we go.
Come on.
There we go. Hello. I think I already did it. Do you have comments
I think
on
it's
your
good.
end, Pete?
No, I don't. It's all looking good to me.
Okay, cool. I don't either. We just gotta pick our.
Cool. As long as you can see the questions that people list or whatever, yeah, we can pick our weird faces or whatever.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, you got Mew. That's cool. Yeah, thanks to everyone who's joining. Wow, that's a lot of people joining. Nice. Not too bad.
Hey, John, where did you go?
Wow. Oh, that's cool.
We've got Franny.
Oh, nice.
All right, well, we're live.
All right.
Cool.
Hey, Pete.
Hey, Marcy. Hey, John. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. Cool. Yeah, thanks for doing this with me. Marcy, thanks for suggesting this. And John, thanks for agreeing to do it. Definitely never done anything like this before. I really hate talking online, and I don't like show my face even in like DJ streams online or anything like that. But I think everything going on, I'm just whatever. Try something different to change.
No, I've never interviewed anybody to my knowledge.
I don't think you've ever gone on Instagram.
Yeah.
Live.
Oh, yeah. Never been on Instagram.
Yeah. I'm just trusting it'll be cool because it's basically like the same conversations we've had before, like at your house and stuff, but it's just like some people are watching or whatever, so it's all good. We can do that.
Yeah, probably, but I won't have to feel as bad about bombarding you with questions as I might in my house.
Oh, no. There's going to be some use to just like all the ceaseless like Discog scrounging and like asking my like more in the know friends about stuff. It's going to go to some purpose. At least if I can pass on some of it to a couple of people, it's cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, like I thought I'd get things started with asking you, for different people, electronic music's history begins at different points in time.
Yeah.
In terms of their own personal taste, where does for you, where does the history of electronic music begin?
In terms of like how I originally found it and stuff like that for my personal story, or in terms of where?
In terms of like, do you see it hip hop as being the beginning? Do you see synth pop as being the beginning? Do you think?
I get you.
Krautrock.
Yeah.
Do you see 50s? You know?
It's so tough because it's total frog boiling the kettle type of situation, as I'm sure you know, where it's like for me, I'd say some of the earliest stuff that I'm just blown away by is like the early experimental electronic, like Tom Disavelt, Kid Baltan, like the library and like records done at universities with just like people just raw experimenting with crazy machines and shit like that. Morton Subotnick's a big favorite of mine. Like it's not stuff that I listen to every single day, but it's like I've seen him live, and it was absolutely as good and as relevant and cool as seeing like Richard Devine or Otto or anyone like that playing. So I feel like that's probably stuff that I see as like, wow, this is really using technology to the end of some sort of cool stuff that goes beyond just like, synthesizing existing instruments or anything like that.
Right.
Would you agree with that, or what would your take be?
Did you ever listen to Alvin Lucier?
Yeah. What's it? The Well tune, or what's it called? Oh, it's something about the devil, I guess. I know I have a record by him.
I can't remember. He has this.
I can't remember the name of it now.
It's his voice saying one thing, and then it starts regenerating on itself, and eventually it's just the room feeding back on the one voice, and it's beautiful music just from regenerating the same sound over and over. But yeah,
I got to go check that one out.
Yeah, I love that kind of stuff too. So and then where would you say it goes from there for you?
I mean, it's tough because that was good examples of almost like electronic for its own sake, like really experimenting, seeing what the boundaries of music was. And there was almost like, I feel like not an awkward period, but a period where like popular music and the intersection of that were almost not ham-fisted, but it was a bit more of a sort of direct linear approach. Like you'd have albums of like classic songs, but they're performed on a Moog or something, or they're reconstructed with synth or something like that. And then obviously, I think where it personally gets interesting to me is, as you said, hip hop and early electro, and when this technology. Oh, I mean, obviously, disco had some really crazy production. This is stuff where I'll have to feign ignorance. I'm not the best person to talk about all the instances, but I know there was some great studio trickery back in the disco days. But then, especially by the time of hip hop, people are doing all sorts of wild stuff. And I mean, you probably know even more about that than me, because I know you definitely respect some of that stuff too.
But you were saying you like Tamita and Wendy Carlos and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
that's
I definitely like that stuff.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of who is the guy that did all of the horoscope records, like one for each astrological sign. I could picture it. I even have a couple of them, but yeah, I definitely do like that stuff for
right.
sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear what people were doing with synths when there was no rules about how were you supposed to use them, or what were you how are you supposed to achieve a certain sound. Like nobody had made the rules yet, so they would do weird stuff to try to make it imitate a violin or a cello or whatever, like
Exactly.
voices or whatever.
Yeah.
It's interesting listening to that stuff from the 60s.
Yeah, that was really cool. And man, it's just really tough to pinpoint certain things, because I do feel like there's some of it that really just try to be musical, and it's almost sort of taking a musical template and just applying the instrument to it. But what you said about synths, I think what's cool is like early on, I mean, obviously there were some mainstream synths early on, but a lot of these guys were just literally building their own crazy stuff at universities or whatever. So it wasn't even just a matter of like a band going and, buying something at Guitar Center or something. You really had people going from like the circuit level up and just like building this madness, which I think is really cool.
Totally, because it's before they invented the modular synth. People were taking the elements of a synth and putting them together in their own weird way with tape and cutting it up and stuff. Yeah, I'm really into that kind of stuff as well, like Xenakis and Parmigiani and Pierre Schaeffer.
Oh yeah, honest Jacques, Bernard Parmigiani is a big favorite. I didn't really find out about him until I got into IDM, and as soon as you like get beyond the crust of IDM into like Schematic Records, Auto, and all those guys, like as wild as they are, they'll like talk your ear off about all that, and they absolutely love it and are hugely influenced by people like him.
Totally. But as far as your real passionate interests in, I guess you weren't even really into electronic before you got into breakcore, or you were into some electronic music?
Not really. I mean, I really came from like, I got into music when I was really young, and it was into like just whatever I could find when I was like 5, 6, 7, 8. The first thing I found being in Boston was like crazy punk metal and grindcore and stuff like that, like sort of band stuff, just because Boston always had a lot of record shops for that. And there was like, even near my school, there was shops where I could go down and like people in the bands would work there. So that was the first stuff that I found. And that wasn't really anything to do with electronic music, but it was basically noise, a lot of that stuff. It was basically pushing beyond the point of classic, even aggressively fast punk songs, to the point of like doing something that's a bit more like transgressive and not just a linear, not to disrespect songs or anything, but it's almost like a different type of thing than a song. Like a band that would do like, this band around here, AC, recorded like one record where they did 16 takes of 16 totally different things of being as crazy as possible, and then just overlaid them all on one record. So it's like the most dense noise, completely impossible to understand type of thing. And I remember just loving that when I was 12, 13 years old. Nothing felt more badass to me than like hearing something like that like you almost couldn't even understand what was happening. It was all like flying by your head so quick. Yeah. But honestly, before electronic music, me being a nerdy kid with like a crappy computer early on and stuff like that, that made me want to find some sort of intersection of like that sort of stuff with electronic music. So I'd probably say that's what it was for me.
Yeah, like people forget that about punk and stuff, that it was a barrage of electricity, in the same way that when you play a synth, you're basically playing electricity. Like that's what people were doing with loud amplification and stuff and recording. It's all electricity. So it sounds like you just were drawn to that early on, you know.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. What was the earliest stuff for you that got you into it? Like,
It's weird because I went through different phases. I guess when I was a little kid, I have a distinct memory of hearing "I Feel Love" on the radio for the first time, being like 6 years old. So I remember knowing like this doesn't sound like anything else, you know, knowing like,
totally.
wow, what sound, you know, where do those sounds come from? I mean, for me, all music was like that, but I could tell that was different from everything else I'd heard, you know. I used to think that song was all electronic, but I found out recently that I guess the kick drum is a real kick drum. But anyways, it was like, you know, it was the first time that there was like a #1 song that was all electronic instruments, you know.
Yeah, I would say something about the pulse of that song, even if it did have a live kick drum, it does feel sort of other and doesn't feel like a live band playing that or anything by any means.
Yeah, it's all sequencing. So yeah, like I knew something was strange about it, but I didn't know what. But I remember the moment. I remember where I was in my mom's car in Florida, Fort Lauderdale, right, driving around. But
oh, nice.
But yeah, you know, it was always like different things. Like through like growing up, I liked that weird '50s, you know, like Edgar Varese and Xenakis and stuff like that. I was into that when I was young. Like, but you know, just like Brian Eno and things like that. Like, definitely wasn't aware of house music or acid or techno or anything like that during the '80s. You know.
We found out about jungle in the 90s.
Yeah, I found out about jungle in the 90s. Yeah. But yeah,
cool. Oscar, I wish I had heard about that earlier on. What age were you when you were hearing like Edgar Varese and like that?
I guess about 13, 14.
Yeah. Oh wow, that rules, man. I wish I had more of a formal and no disrespect to myself listening to bands like AC or whatever. Or there was a Florida band I used to hugely love called Asuk. That were like my favorite. That was my thing when I was like in like 92, 93 or something like that. But I would have loved to have a bit more of a formal interest in electroacoustic and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. I was aware of it at that. I mean, I had the records at that age. I used to buy them and listen to them and trip out. But yeah, that Poem Electronic of Edgar Varese, it's just one of the greatest pieces of music ever, you know. It's just like, just hear that. I just remember hearing that and just being like, wow, what the hell is that? It's a whole world coming through your record player, you know. It's not just like a song.
Yeah. For sure.
But yeah, like, but yeah, it seems like as far as the things that directly led to things like for me, jungle and breakbeat hardcore seem to me to be direct descendants from hip hop. Hip hop, like, you know, synth pop may have been some part of it in some way, but it really seems like just a faster version of hip hop in a lot of ways. Do you agree?
Yeah, I feel like it was I don't want to say the British version of hip hop. There very much was a British version of hip hop. Some of it was actually called Britcore, but it was the first distinctly British version of something like hip hop, where it was actually a combination of basically you had these kids who were there, and like either they or their parents or their cousins would have like a sound, like a reggae sound system. So they'd have all the old like rare groove and soul records and reggae records. So they'd get the bass lines from those. But obviously they were around in the 80s, so everyone was loving hip hop and electro. So they would have those records, so they'd be able to sample the breakbeats from those. That's why if you listen to a lot of early jungle hardcore records, some of them do sample from some really cool crate dug breaks, but honestly, a lot of them aren't too precious they don't use an original super rare groove sample like breakbeat that no one could find at the time. They're more likely to basically they would take a hip hop record where that hip hop record from like the late 80s, early 90s, that guy sourced the cool rare groove thing and added his own drums on top. And that would be what the jungle and hardcore guys would find. And they'd sample that break and then they'd speed it up to twice speed and chop it up even more or whatever. So yeah, I definitely see it as a combination of the hip hop thing with the reggae bass lines, and then especially more so early on, not as much as jungle went on, but especially with the 92, 93, there was a lot of the Belgian influence of like the crazy rave synth and stuff like that, which was just a big thing, coming out of New Beat into just like quote unquote, techno and rave or whatever. It was earliest hardcore was a big mashup of all those basically.
Yeah. So do you have any favorite sort of obscure? I guess we could take it back to either like Jamaican music that you see as being related to hardcore and jungle, or hip hop that's some maybe things that are some of your favorite things from those genres.
Oh man, it's tough to say. I'm a little bit ignorant here. I love hip hop and I love dub and I love reggae. I don't know as much as I should about dub and reggae. I've slowly started to build my collection now. But I mean, you know me, I'm like I have trouble when I when I start to get into things late because I always love the details and the intricate, obscure, nerdy stuff. So it's almost frustrating because I feel like I'm starting on the ground floor. Obviously, the main producers, people like King Tubby were influential, stuff like that. In terms of hip hop, one of the producers who got a lot of stuff sampled was a guy in the UK called Simon Harris. I think he worked for or ran a label, Music of Life, which was sort of the main UK hip hop imprint that had all basically the biggest hip hop acts in the UK. I think maybe other than like Silver Bullet or someone like that. But the thing was, I think they even actually did an album that was Simon Harris, Harris. And I'm trying to think of what tracks you would have heard his breaks in. A lot of like I think like Criminal Minds. A lot of his breaks ended up in stuff where he did stuff sort of similar to the US guys. I guess all the hip hop guys did it, where they take an original funk speed break. Those guys, the real good guys, would take it from the source. Other people would take it more from the Planet of the Breaks comps, and I'm sure you've seen those, like the ones that would have collections of breaks. But then they'd layer drum machines on top just to make it fatter and basically make it work better in hip hop. Yeah. And so I would say he was probably one of the more important ones. I guess another interesting thing about hip hop is that if you look at some of the earliest hardcore guys who actually went on to even do jungle and stuff, started off in the hip hop scene. So there was one of the biggest UK hip hop guys was a guy named MC Duke, who I think was on Music of Life. He had a big track called I'm Riffin'. And that break that's used, the I'm Riffin' break, which I believe Simon Harris engineered, even though it's based on some older breaks, that's used in tons of hardcore tunes. But that guy ended up going on and doing a bunch of really cool hardcore jungle records, 93, 95, and running his own label. And then also, I think he had a studio and he produced a couple of other records in there. I didn't even realize the studio thing until I was just looking at a record earlier today and I noticed it said like Double H Productions, which I think was his studio, if I'm not wrong. So that guy was, and then there's another early guy who's still around. He just put out
when he makes hardcore, his name's, what is it again?
He has a couple of different ones. I think he uses EKUDCM, which if you spell it out is actually MC Duke backwards or something. Right. But his label is called Hard Disk Recordings. Right. I think I heard he's finally getting open. Some people might be reissuing some of that, which is cool because some of the ones on his label are like impossible to find. They're like $200, $300 or something. But they're really cool, like that 93, 94, 95, choppy breaks, dark, sinister hoovers. You would think that they would have a lot of vocals on them. Honestly, he doesn't have any like rapping on top at that point. It's really switched over more to like be about the beats and stuff like that, which is cool.
Yeah. And so, sorry, to go on with what were you saying?
Yeah, I mean, so that was a good example. I'm trying to think of other like hip hop people. It's so tough. The main thing I can say, and I alluded to this before, was just in general with hip hop, it's all about these things called like second generation breaks, which is basically the idea of it's not the break beat sampled off the Amen. Oh, here's a good example. It's not for the Amen, the original Amen. Maybe some people sampled it from the record, a couple of people. Way more people would have sampled it from one of the original Beats and Breaks comps or the sort of bootleg comps that would have like 20 different samples on. Because, kids didn't have a ton of money. They weren't going to be collecting super rare, hard to find 45s most of the time. So most people would get it from that or from a sample CD, or some people would basically take that break, and instead there was a famous track by Mantronics, who I'm sure you're a fan of. It was
King of the Beats. King of the Beats.
Yeah, King of the Beats. So Amen is sampled in a bunch of tunes too, just because it's like what we can take. Most people didn't have great production studios or really quality gear back then. So it's like, well, you could try to, if you tried to take the original source, you'd have to do a lot of work to beef it up, and most people didn't really know how to do it. So it's better to take like, you know, some hip hop engineers work who actually worked and made a beat really sound sick and warm and compressed. And then if you just use that instead. Another good one that came to my mind off the top of my head is there's this obscure UK record, Dominant Force Rapitivity, that nobody knows, but it's cool because that break was used in some really big hardcore jungle tracks by like Pesce and people like that. And it's just, you would think that maybe it would come from a big obvious tune, but no, it's just from this mad obscure cool hip hop record from the UK.
Wow, awesome. I wrote it down.
Cool. Nice.
So, what were you gonna say?
He said nice.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say basically before we go on, just I'm curious, like, do you have, aside from amens and stuff, do you have any favorite breaks?
Hey, that was one of my questions.
Like, what are your? Oh, okay.
but
you know, let's wait, and then we can trade off answers. That'll be cool. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. But yeah, so far I haven't been reading any of my questions that I wrote down. How are we doing on time?
You guys can talk as long as you want to.
Oh, we can. Great.
Yeah, there's no.
Cool,
cool. Until you guys are tired of this.
So, so yeah, do you have any interest in going over like, because I take it your favorite music is UK breakbeat, hardcore, and jungle. Is that correct? Is that your?
Yeah.
Did you say that's? Yeah. So would you be interested in talking about going through year by year, say from, I don't know when, from like 90 to 95 or 96, and just going through each year and talking about music that you think might be some of the most stand out to you, not necessarily the ones that were the most trendy at the time or the ones that led to the biggest trends, but the ones that for you stand out? Or do you feel like you've done that enough on Blog to the Old School and there's no reason to be
That's a good question. We could talk about it for a bit. I definitely want to stress with all this stuff, by the way, like for everyone listening, I ain't shit. I'm not like a super specialist at this. I'm like a weird generation guy where by virtue of being obsessed with it for 20 years, I'm happy to like blab on and on about this stuff. But the sort of one of the problems of the internet is that like, because people don't know what you know and what you don't know. Depending on how sort of assured people can be when they talk online, sometimes it's easy to see what I'm saying. I mean, you see this with everything and be like, oh yeah, that's the truth. I could be fucking stuff up. I could be like saying some incorrect things. There's definitely lots of people who know way more than me, but it's just definitely something obsessive for me that like, I really love to talk about it. So more coming, that's actually cool that you asked me about something that's totally subjective.
A lot of us who love that kind of music who weren't there have learned a hell of a lot from Blog to the Old School, and not to mention your enthusiasm for it is contagious, and you don't need a license to have enthusiasm for something, you know, like
thanks, yeah.
And including like, I'm pretty sure people like Baby Kane or other people that you've interviewed who were there at the time, like appreciate your site for giving new awareness to what they've done, you know, to younger, newer audiences. So like, I don't know. I love hearing you and reading you talk about that kind of music. So, you know, I don't think there's any reason to, you know, to have a disclaimer or anything.
No problem.
Like that,
I didn't mean to divert it. I just wanted to do a big heavy caveat just before I launch into some stuff. Just because I know that's what I would want to hear, because sometimes I also read what other people write. But I do think it's interesting that because of the internet and because of, I mean, I've been involved with stuff IRL a bit too, like I started going over to UK parties and buying records there around like 97, 98, but I wasn't there in 92, 93, 94, 95. And I was telling you a couple of days earlier this week, because of the internet, there's totally people in the middle of nowhere who've like never even been to London, never bought one of these records in an original store, but who just by virtue of like digging in, going on Discogs, going on other places, have like made crazy lists of records. They found records that no one else really knew about. They've like tracked down artists. There was one that I mentioned to you. There's this guy I kind of want to shout out, though I haven't seen him online much, named Gorn, Gorn, and he literally lives in fucking Siberia, and he has the craziest lists on Discogs of like all the most obscure dark side records ever, and like all these records that even people in the UK didn't know because they sound like jungle, but they were produced by in like more around like 97, 98 when that sound had gone. So at my best, like I kind of hope to like doing blog to the old school and stuff. I'm trying to provide more of a secondary resource kind of thing like that to be like, hey, any of us can, show our enthusiasm and try to get information out there because it's all sort of additive or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm happy to talk about a couple of favorites.
Yeah, just things that are personal favorites to you. Just could be obscure, could be well known, whatever. Just I'm interested in what stands out for you from each year, and perhaps, yeah.
Sure.
Not if that's
I guess to start with
that's hard because thousands of things came out every year, and it was just like.
Yeah, and honestly, I know we sort of talked about what we were going to talk about, but just so everyone who is online knows this, we didn't discuss these questions fully. This is all like brand new to both of us, so this is real live reaction shit.
Okay, let me
that's good. I can
start
actually.
over. Let me start over.
Okay.
How many records do you think there were between 91 and 95 from that basic scene of UK hardcore?
Yeah. This is a good question. I've been trying to figure this out on Discogs, and it's tough because I know that I personally own about 6,000. I'd say I probably have like somewhere between 85 and 95% of them. Discogs, it seems like it's somewhere around 9,000, but it's hard to say because certain records had multiple pressings where there's like the regular label pressing, there's the white label pressing. I think I tried to check out the number of unique labels, and that was, what was it, like 1,600 or something like that. Obviously not counting stuff like white labels, which didn't really have it. But yeah, I'd say somewhere roughly around 9,000 to 10,000 or something. Like, does that sound reasonable to you based on what you've seen, or?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, it's hard for me to tell on Discogs because I feel like sometimes they call something jungle that came out way after the fact, so.
Yeah, it's true.
But I guess you're able to refine it to that period of time or something?
Yeah, and it's also tricky because in early days, like 91, there are certain tracks that are kind of hardcore, but then they're also kind of house. It's more of almost like house tempo, but with a breakbeat behind it. And there's literally stuff, I think it was more called breakbeat house. So you'll find some records that are like breakbeat house, some that are breakbeat hardcore, then some that are breakbeat slash house slash hardcore. And I guess I would kind of call those hardcore. Sometimes it's hard to tell what really pushes it over to that hardcore category. It's just like that, like it's literally a difference of like plus or minus 2 or 3% edge to the tune or something like that, or almost just whoever is adding it to the site, whether they felt that it came from it. I guess the real nerdy people might know sort of what scene it was coming from. There definitely was much more of a real like refined house scene back then where there might have been more sort of, there are tracks that are very much sort of breakbeaty, but they were house tunes and they had nothing to do with hardcore. So yeah, it's all a little bit mixed, but yeah, I'd say 9,000-10,000 track range, which is kind of crazy when you think about like a 5-year period, like 2,000 tracks made, and this isn't music that's being made all across the world at once. This is like hyper localized to one country by and large. Some other countries, some other people doing it, but like that many people cranking out that many tunes, it's like like 10 tracks a day or something like that. It's wild.
Yeah, and I guess I wanted to get into some like in your awareness of the types of setups that people used to record on during that period of time, say like either 91 to 95 or 92 to 95 or something.
Yeah.
Like what? Like could you just explain for people that don't know what the general basic setup was with
Sure
Amigas and stuff?
Yeah. So I mean, people basically coming from a period. The main difference between then and now is that nowadays, for like a couple $200, everyone can have this crazy computer that could have literally every sound ever in it, and also whether you can not only can it create every sound from scratch by downloading whatever VST you want, but nowadays you can also literally just download from the internet and have access to the world of everything else that everyone's always ever recorded. And I mean, you don't even have to be precious about it. People can literally just go on YouTube and grab whatever they want and sample that if they want to. Back in those days, none of that existed. People were really limited in what they had access to. It was more like physical media. So in terms of people wanting to make tunes, is like, what would you have? Well, I mean, some kids started and they had Amigas back in the late 80s, early 90s. That was one way to start to work on tunes. And I mean, that was cool because it was if you had the Amiga, Then there was software you could use for free, like Octamed Pro Tracker, stuff like that. And that's nice because that was an easy way to start because all you needed was the Amiga. Oh, I guess you would need a sampling sound card like Turbo Sound Pro, but that would be a cheap, 50, 100-pound thing. You didn't need an expensive sampler or crazy hardware or anything like that. If you had that, you could sort of work on some tunes, but that was in its own way was really rudimentary for people. It would basically give you could only have 4 channels at once of like samples running out of the thing. And it was all 8-bit, and it was very limited in the amount of memory and space you have. I forget how many seconds, but it's almost the same limitations as early samplers, where the sampler space, where the time that you had on samplers was just like very, very little, as you know, because you have a lot of those early samplers, John. But so that was one thing that people had, and then aside from that, though, there was also obviously there was early samplers that started coming out. There were samplers like the EMU emulator and things like that earlier on. I honestly don't think much of that got used for really hardcore and jungle. It really started to take off with the Akais, like the S950, the S1000, as we were talking about before. I actually asked a buddy of mine about this because I really don't know much. I wasn't buying the samplers back then, but I was curious, like, why did people mainly do the S950? As you know, like a lot of people love the S950 now. It goes for like a couple $1,000s or something because instead, it's not 8-bit, which is what the Amiga was, and it's not 16-bit, which is what CDs and most things ended up being. It's 12-bit. It's somewhere in between. So it has this slight crusty edge, but it also isn't like so lo-fi that you can't actually do stuff with it. According to my buddy Marlon, who I talked to, Equinox, who was there at the time and remembers people buying it, it's just a simple matter of the 950 was way cheaper than the S1000. Right. And the difference between those was basically... Yeah, the S1000 was out at the same time, but the S1000 was fancy-ass 16-bit. So it could do everything the S950 did, but it was 16-bit instead of 12-bit. So especially producers who were buying stuff at home, who were trying to build basic setups at home, they weren't going to splash out for that. Right. And in fact, a lot of producers couldn't even buy the 950.
Overlooked, huh?
Exactly. And even producers who wanted the 950 a lot of the time had to wait because it was like, a couple $1,000s or something. It does remind me a bit of with Acid House and Chicago House, where the 303, which everyone knows is the thing to make it and which is popular and goes for insane amounts of money now, a lot of people started buying those in the old Roland machines because they were like $20, $30 and used thrift shops in Chicago or whatever, because originally they were meant to like accompany bands, and for that purpose they suck, and so they were a failure in that regard, but people repurposed it. I would love to say that the same thing happened in jungle, but realistically, I don't think anyone was buying 950s for like 50 pounds. So I don't want to push it that bad, but everyone really was, at least for home studios, most people were on a real strict budget. Yeah. And the only different situation there would be some people would build up studios at home, which is obviously these young, 15, 16-year-old kids trying to do it, so they have limited funds. But then there were some studios getting set up for this stuff that would have better equipment, but being at a studio, I mean, obviously you would have to go pay to use that studio. And, as you know from working on stuff, having a setup at home is just really the vibe. It's really good to be able to constantly have it and not go in and sort of rush stuff out. But having studios which did have a bit more gear and have more synths and stuff like that, and, depending on the studio, some of them would have more distinctive gear so that even if different people used it, it's not that all the tracks would sound the same, but like there's almost like certain things that certain producers did. So like, for instance, I know that you're a big fan of Pete Parsons from Monroe Studios. Yeah. And like a lot of his stuff, it's not that he wrote all the tunes and did it, but like it ends up having a similar sort of vibe because it was all engineered by him or whatever.
Yeah.
I can't remember, you probably know better than me, or you remember better than me what kind of gear he used, but he was one of the peak guys in terms of just getting a really good sound out that was like, wasn't too clean, was definitely a step above most of the other people, I think.
Yeah, I think most of that kind of music was recorded on the DAT tape, and he was recording, I think, on the tape. No,
he was. I think all his original recordings were done to DAT tape, but there's depending which artist went in. It's funny. I actually remember talking to an artist. Well, it's funny. It's interesting to me because I'm a fucking nerd. But I remember talking to an artist maybe 3 or 4 years ago who had a track on a comp, and then I heard he had done a whole other session with Pete Parsons that never came out. And I was like, shit, man, you got to find this for me. I want to hear it. He's like, and he sent it to me, and it was like way lo-fi. It didn't sound like Pete Parsons. And what he told me was, at the time, he could just barely pay to afford to go do a session at Pete's studio, but he couldn't afford the DAT tape, and he didn't really have time to finish it. So they just recorded it down to cassette. But really, any people who did real pro sessions or were looking to get stuff signed would record it down to DAT tape, because realistically, you know, there was a few ropey white labels that did get pressed off of cassette tape, but that I don't believe that was a common occurrence. Maybe
No,
early days are for.
I meant
Yeah,
like
yeah.
half-inch tape or quarter-inch tape or
Oh, okay,
1 inch
interesting.
tape. Like, do you know? Like, do
Shit,
you know?
that's
Like, I'm guessing like Prodigy like wrote their shit in a bedroom, but then I think probably went to a studio and recorded it on tape. No,
yeah.
their
Man, I
manuscript.
should know this. I'm gonna plead total ignorance,
I
John.
could have
I
sworn that Pete Parsons
yeah,
was somebody who was recording stuff onto tape, but maybe I'm
interesting.
wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly know just from talking to like people involved with the label, all the finished stuff that would go off to the plants and stuff, all it had to be on DATs in the end.
Right.
I don't know if in between that they ever did any stuff to audio tape. I would think that most producers might not have, just in terms of the extra cost, because it was really based on these sort of quick, cheap sessions, get in, bang out a record, and no one was making that much on the records. But it certainly is possible. I would think that probably other producers like Rob Playford, people like that, once they got to the point where he was doing like records for Goldie and stuff like that, I bet a lot of that shit was done to like crazy multi-track lush setups and things like that. It's
Right.
certainly possible that Pete was doing the same. That's a good question. One of us should ask him that, man, actually. I'm curious to know that.
Like I was just watching that Jungle documentary where Shy FX is in the studio and stuff, and there's somebody in a patch bay and stuff. Like it's being recorded, like he did it at home, but it's being recorded in a nice, pretty nice studio, you know. Like
Yeah.
which producers from that period do you know for a fact that stand out in your head were actually their own engineers and weren't going to a studio to
Oh man, that's a really good question. It's tough. It's depending on who. I immediately just think of all the people who went to the major studios and stuff like that.
like I know
Here's one. Here's a
Dillinger's
great one.
somebody.
Yeah, Dillinger is a guy, and then another one that I really got to shout out is Busy Bee is a perfect example of that. Busy Bee is like literally the most self-made man in all of hardcore jungle from literally age 15. He's been doing everything himself. You know, he's put out a couple of things on other labels over the years, like one or two things, but by and large, he was always like a one-man setup. He had a studio that a ton of people used. He had many different labels. He had clothing lines. He had he helped do events. He was a DJ on the radio, and it was almost like a weird like business concept of like I forget if it's vertical or horizontal integration. Yeah, it's funny. I just mentioned Busy Bee. Right now, my buddy Ben, who knows way more than me, and he was around in the early days, just pinged me on Facebook to say, mention Busy Bee, mention Busy Bee. So yeah, he's a perfect example of a guy. And with him, like even though he was doing it quote unquote at home, he built out a studio and I would maybe argue, not to disrespect any other artists saying that they weren't doing like crazy stuff, but he would really work on experimenting with beats and really trying to do some really next level shit. Like that, even to the point of it wasn't necessarily like pop music anymore. It was like literally, it's almost back to the original days of like 1950s, like Edgar Varese or like Tom Disselveld and Kid Baltan or those guys, like Morton Subotnick, in terms of like 3 different layers of time stretch breaks layered on top of each other and cutting out in different ways.
Yeah.
And and then there was other people associated with them like Equinox and Deluxe back then who would also, they would all have their Amigas at home and then they would bring their tracks to him and then he would sort of either rewrite them or like combine them in with his machine, with his Amigas and his machines, or resample the stuff on there, and they'd create these crazy Frankenstein tracks and stuff like that. He's the best example of someone who didn't have like a multi-million-dollar crazy stuff. He probably had plenty of good gear eventually, but it was completely sort of self-done. It wasn't like a stuffy atmosphere by someone who didn't love the music or anything.
Yeah. Did Remark do it all by himself? Do you know?
I don't remember if he had a studio on his own. He definitely is a great producer and great DJ. I'm sure he certainly wasn't a dude that was going in and letting other people do stuff for him. But
Yeah.
I can't remember I think he did have a studio at home originally, but I can't remember now. Honestly, I'll just plead ignorance on it.
Right. So is there any artists that stand out that had particularly minimal setups? Like, I guess you're saying you don't know of anybody who was doing stuff with an 8-bit sampler or anything like that. Like that just wasn't happening then, correct?
Yeah, sorry. Can you repeat what was the thing about 8-bit? It cut out for a second over here.
I was saying there's no one you can think of from that period who was using an 8-bit sampler that you know of.
Oh, They're definitely. I mean, there was people that did full tracks on Octamed. There's a few select ones. I'm pretty sure. So Red Alert and DJ Red Alert and Mike Slammer. There's this label Slam and Vinyl that are all these tracks that are crazy they're crazy mega mixes of all the best samples and all the other music, and those were all just crazy Amiga mashups. I think that worked well because I don't know, it was just quick and fast to do, but they could also put a lot of time into it or whatever. So that was a good example of that. Urban Shakedown Some Justice is the go-to example of a really huge anthem track that was done on an Amiga, or done on, I think, 2 Amigas that were sort of synced together or something by some artificial means. That I don't think it wasn't ever re-recorded on a professional system or anything. It came straight out of the Amiga and became like a chart-topping hit. Some other producer that my buddy just like pinged me about that I forgot to mention, that's not an example of the 8-bit, but it's an example of someone with a really distinctive sound who did 1 million tracks and really had their own voice to the point where even when other people came in and worked with him, it still ended up being like more 50-50 him, is Jack Smooth, the guy from Basement Records. Basically the guy who engineered every single record on Basement Records, who was more, he did some stuff with breakbeats and stuff, but honestly, his big interest was in programming synths and programming like FM synthesis sounds sort of from scratch. So it's really a distinct sound if you listen to those Basement Records. It doesn't sound like almost any other label out there because, there's breakbeats, but they're more sort of straight looping, going with a sort of pumping like 150 to 160 beat, but then there's all these synths on top, and you can tell the synths, honestly, a lot of the other good tracks, even like probably some of your favorite synths in early hardcore stuff, they sound wicked, but realistically, that's just some shit sampled from a good techno record. None of his stuff. Almost all of his synths, I think, were more original sounds and original pads because he really invested in a big studio of like loads of synthesizers and loads of that sort of stuff. I mean, to the point where when people sampled him, or if like nowadays looking back, you will listen to a record that he engineered, and even he's quite upfront about it online, being like, oh yeah, that's one where you could tell that the guy who did the record was just making the tea and I actually produced it or whatever.
Right.
So that's a really cool example, and someone for anyone to look into is Jack Smooth, I'd say.
Wow, that's so cool.
Sorry, and his real name is his name's Ron Wells. Sorry, I was forgetting to say that. That's his actual name online. Right.
So he was making FM patches and stuff himself.
Yeah, he was, and he's like real. If you see, he's very vocal on Facebook and stuff like that now. It's very different being into this stuff now, circa like even 15, 20 years ago, where there was such an air of mystery. But now, seeing how people talk about it, you get to see with these old guys what their feelings really were about it, and he's very proud of that stuff, and he was very focused on it. He wants everything to be sort of as original as possible, and like trying to really construct stuff from scratch or whatever, to the point where he even nowadays he plays his own drums on like an electronic drum kit or something like that.
Yeah, I thought that was cool that Baby Kane had a DX7 in his setup, or said he had it. Like, do you think he was making his own patches as well?
He might have been. He has that really, Baby Kane has that really infamous super low subby. It's like a sub bass, but it's not. It's like right above audible range, so it's like boo, so you can sort of hear it going all the way through the track. I wouldn't be surprised if he worked something that out either on a DX7 or some other gear, and was like, it became like a distinct thing for him that he ran with. I guess it's easier now, with computers, everyone can go download 1 million patches. You would know better than me in terms of like back in the 90s, like how would people go about getting SysX? Would they literally have to get like discs somehow, or like how would you go about programming SysX stuff in?
You're asking me?
Yeah. I don't know that shit. Yeah, I don't own like one big synth even. Honestly, you're the legit synth guy, I'd say.
Right. Yeah. No. I like all I know is that like they were doing a lot of sequencing from a computer, but not really using sounds from a computer. And
that's fair.
And if they had a synth, they had a synth, but most likely they had a sampler and just like and yeah, like. But yeah, as far as like how it was all connected, I've never had a setup like that. So like.
Oh, okay.
So it's
yeah, because there was some stuff in between too, right? Like there was the synths and there was the samplers, but then there was also the romplers, and there was things like for instance, like with Atmospheric Jungle and stuff. So much of the pads and stuff aren't sampled from the ones that aren't sampled from techno records. A load of those come from stuff like the JV 1080, which is really, really cool synthesizer, but it's kind of limited in what you can do. It's not like a modular thing, or it's not like a DX7 where you're gonna like build a sound from the most basic DNA blocks. It's kind of got a bunch of canned samples, and then it has patches made up from sets of those canned samples. And so you could sort of go in and tweak it. You could tweak the relative levels of the component sounds, but it's not like, as you're saying, with a DX7, where you can go in and literally say, I'm going to start with a sine wave, and then I'm going to modulate that sine wave with a square wave or something.
Yeah. And as far as synthesizers that were commonly used during that time, other than the JV1 1080, what other synths do you recall that were common? I remember you once telling me a D50. That's why I asked. I thought you.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's good you mentioned. I forgot that. I would never remember to say that. The D50 was a good one. After the 1080, the successor to the 1080 was also used. Man, I wish some of my buddies were online right now so they could ping me this, because I definitely have buddies who really specialize in, they have all the old synths and stuff like that. There was some. Sure. So a Rompler is basically like a sampler, but it's not made for you to bring in samples and just tweak the samples yourself. It comes with a bunch of canned samples in it, where an individual patch is going to be basically, it's going to have a sound, but it's an individual patch is going to basically be a sample, but with built-in stuff, so you can sort of tweak the sample to a certain degree. But at the end of the day, it's a sample. It's not a built-up sound with a series of operators. So like the example of the JV1080, I said, if you think about a nice pad and like a Lucky Spin Tune or something, that's kind of complex and it has like a few elements to it. In the JV1080, if you went into like a Rompler patch for that, you would find there's maybe 3 or 4 different sounds. And one of the sounds is maybe a high end. In itself, it's not like a sine wave. It's like its own complicated sample. And then one of the other parts is maybe the low end or some like, and then maybe there's a third sound that's like a noise part of it or something. And then all of those are integrated by this Rompler thing into one single patch, and they're layered in a certain way. You have limited access to sort of modify them, but you're not going to really get into it. It's not a DX7 or one of those crazy TZ807 things or something where you're really ripping apart the sound itself.
Right. So do you have any favorite synths? Are you very much into synths yourself?
Honestly, I'm not. I love hearing them, and I love hearing like when my friends record me shit from them. My personal favorite in terms of ones which have been emulated and which you can grab is basically the JV1080, just because I didn't know about that for the longest time. I didn't have enough room in my place. I didn't have money to put into that because I was too busy buying records. So when I finally found it, it was like, oh wow, that sounds from that. That sounds from that. That sounds from that. And so I feel like it's almost like a classic jungle all in one thing. But then there's also other sounds you hear that have that classic feel but aren't necessarily obviously used yet. So that's a real cool one for that style of music. Me personally, in terms of just like weird ass synths that I love that don't have anything to jungle, I do want to mention one that I used to always love when I was in college, when I was into jungle, but I was starting to produce breakcore basically. Have you ever tried the Yamaha FS1R before? Or have you heard about that one?
That's a real advanced FM series.
Yeah. So that was one that came out and it was almost like too ahead of its time. And I remember like, I want to say 98, 99, 2000. I forget, I don't know what they originally retailed for, but they were one of these things that basically went down to, it was like $400 or something. And that's one of the crazy, in terms of just being able to just do literally anything with sound, that's one of the craziest synths that's probably ever come out in terms of that, at least as far as I know. And so when I had a roommate in college who we actually met because we started talking about Photech, and he had one of those FS1Rs, and I never got too good at it, but I would love to like check out him messing with it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's a big personal favorite of mine. That's like that was after Jungle's time, unfortunately.
And you're saying Photech used an FS1R?
No. My roommate in college was someone that I met because we just started talking about Photech randomly, and I was like, oh, this kid likes jungle and I like jungle. So I ended up getting access to some, he would have some music gear. Like he had Innovation and, an FS1R. So that was the only time I ever really got to see synths myself up in person.
Right. So now we've come around. Do you have any? It's a twofold question. I'm wondering if you have any favorite breaks yourself that you use in your own music, and also if there's any examples of people using unusual breaks besides like Thinking Amen and Sesame Street and stuff like in the 91, 95 period.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, I've got some real favorites, and it's kind of changed over time. One of my earliest favorites that I remember hearing that like wasn't super usable, but I just loved the distinctiveness of it because it was so simple, was one called In One Piece, where peace is spelled P-E-A-C-E instead of P-I-E-C-E. And it's just simple, but it's just the sound of the hats and everything. I remember that was one of the first things where like the tone, even more striking to me than an amen, because everyone's heard an amen. It almost like, as cool as it sounds, it's not like I sit there in awe over the sound or anything. But that I remember hearing that break and thinking, wow, that's really fat. I've tried doing stuff with it. It's not a break that you could really make a whole jungle tune from just because there's not that much going on in it. But it's certainly a cool one. There's another big personal favorite of mine is like a second generation one where it started off as, I think, I'm going to fuck it up. It's either Weather Report or Mahavishnu Orchestra, which is cool for me because I used to love like fusion-y stuff, like the most intricate wanky fusion-y stuff like Billy Cobham and those groups and stuff like that. It started off as, I think, either a Weather Report or Mahavishnu break, but then Eric B. and Rakim used it. And it's on a track they did called, I think, Here Comes the Hand Grenade. And so it's known as the Hand Grenade breakbeat. And not many people used it. DJ Hype used it in a few tunes in 1993. And it's just a super rolling break that's like almost all 16th notes. It's like almost every single note in the pattern is sort of filled in with a sort of cool rolling break hit. And for me, that's cool because that's always been how I approach music. I'm like, I really suck at space with music. I see all the open dots and I want to fill everything in. So that sort of made that one speak to me. But also it's just cool because it also sort of naturally falls on like a pretty straight 16th or 8th or 16th note cadence. So, I mean, that's not good for funkiness, but in terms of being able to easily chop and shift stuff around and stuff, it makes it super easy to sort of automatically like chop that up and get real cool shuffly feels to it without having to worry about like awkward timings or anything like that. That's like been a big favorite over the past few years, I'd say.
Did you say the name of the song that's from?
Yeah, I almost want to check on computer, but I think it's called Here Comes the Hand Grenade. Man, if any of my friends are watching this and want to ping me, otherwise I'll go confirm right now. Or something, definitely something Eric B. and Rakim Hand Grenade would be.
Right.
There we go. I can find it right now. Let me get the facts right. Is Eric B. and Rakim? Oh man, I hope I'm not getting that wrong. Let me search for Hand Grenade Hip Hop. Yeah. Don't sweat the technique. And it is called, it's called Pass the Hand Grenade. That's it.
Pass the Hand Grenade. And so, and then it is, you know, I guess there's certain artists that use unusual breaks more than others. I don't know, like Foul Play, maybe Criminal Minds. I don't know, like
I'd say a big one for that would be Paradox and DJ Trax. So those guys were always kind of distinct. They actually, unlike a lot of other people that sort of like did the breaks things when it was cool, but then 96 came, and as technology got better and better, the dance floor sort of dictated that people wanted more linear, harder, louder, more oomphy sounding stuff, which sort of made people move away from the tone of breaks. Or even drum and bass would continue to have breaks, but they would be layering it a bunch. Those guys, Paradox and DJ Trax, always stayed true to, they loved rare groove breaks. They would find the craziest breaks that like no one else was using. And what's cool about that is if you go back to their tracks, even back in like 92, 93, like they were already doing that shit. And they were digging as much as anyone. And they were just always about the breaks. And, you know, aside from the records that people know, they did a really early record on Moving Shadow that never came out. I think because Rob Playford, like the guy who ran the label, this is me just guessing, but if you listen to it, there's no way that a label like that was at the top of the sort of commercial peak could put something like this out and sort of promote it as a big commercial record. It's basically like two sides of 180 beats per minute, crate dug cool breakbeats with like 2 or 3 or 4 layers of them all running underneath each other and just like at a super frantic clip. And you could tell that the people are making it. It's just like a labor of love. It's not about making a catchy tune for the dance floor. It's just people who are just obsessed with breakbeats. So I'd say those guys are probably kings for that sort of stuff.
Who is that?
It's a group called Mix Race, and the producers are Paradox, Paradox, and DJ Trax, DJTRAX.
Oh, cool. I love mixed race.
Yeah. Yeah, we love that mixed race stuff that you put out as well.
Oh, nice. Thanks. Yeah, those tunes I did are fun. I'll get a link you to this earlier release. I think it's Shadow 43. It's very, very hard to find. They even sort of, no one could find it for years and years. I managed to get a copy for 20 pounds years ago just from some guy who, like, maybe 15, 20 years ago from somebody who didn't care about it. But, like, you didn't see them ever come up. And then just recently, one of the guys who used to work at Moving Shadow found like a stash of them in his house and like brought them to a records sale in the UK, like this Clashmouth thing, which is where all the drum and bass and jungle labels go to sell stuff. And he just sold all these like original dead stock copies off. What sucks is I was there and I would have loved to get it like an extra dead stock copy, but like I was so busy working at a label stand, I didn't even get it. They were gone by the time I checked.
Right.
On that note, there's a question from the audience about, do you have a prized possession electronic record or a prized possession jungle record that you found that's like from a needle in the haystack type? Like, what's like your record, Pete, that is like your prized possession?
That's so cool. It's if you're going to limit to vinyl and not to acetates or stuff like that, then I would say it's almost about the conditions where stuff is found and finding stuff in like the craziest conditions. So there's a couple which aren't even my favorite records, but were found in just like impossible conditions. So there's a really rare Greensleeves Raga Jungle record by Ecstasy and DJ Keen. Respect to Ecstasy, by the way, is like someone I knew who passed away a couple of years ago, but who was a Raga Jungle producer. And it's just got a really upfront bass line, but that's sort of a thing that you would never expect to see in America because it's quite obscure. They did a certain number back then. It goes for quite a lot of money. I randomly found that in a used thrift store down the street from me when I used to live in a sort of kludgy part of town called Alston. I never found almost any electronic stuff in there. I used to just go in literally because it happened to be next to a place I would go get lunch just because they would play metal. So I randomly walked in and found that almost on its own. And it wasn't like, oh, there was 80 jungle records in there. Like, it was just that. So that was really cool. Another cool one I think of is there was a store in the UK called MVE. Well, there's two really important stores in the UK. One called Music and Video Exchange, which was a whole chain that really specialized in exchange. So it was like buy, sell, trade records. And they had almost all the locations had a basement where they'd have stuff priced reasonably upstairs, but if you went to the basement, everything was like 50p. So as soon as I started going over to the UK, some of my buddies, like this guy Ben, who I know is tuned in right now, like we'd go into those basements and, by the time I got over, it wasn't as crazy as it was. He found the best stuff, but I would find just ridiculous, like 20, 50-pound jungle records down there that just because it wasn't as popular then, no one was fussed with finding it. Before I was over, like 3 or 4 years ago, he used to do that and find piles and he would find so many records in those basements that he would have to basically take a huge pile and then bring them over to a different record store and sell some off so he could have enough to actually fully carry all the way home. That was another cool one, but for me, another one is a two crazy records from this store called Haggle Vinyl in the UK, which no one really liked. Honestly, the owner was a kind of a notorious dickhead, and so people sort of avoided it. And all his it was a similar sort of setup where you had the bargain area and you had the regular area. And the regular area, everything was just priced obnoxiously. He's like a classic warning sign of like like a stereotype of like a mean record sell guy, and they would have like P99 records for like 8-10 pounds and just stuff like that no one was down with. But if you looked on the floor, totally unorganized, for almost the entire square footage of the shop, there's piles and piles and piles of records. Everything was, I think it was either like a pound or 2 pounds. And so a few of the things that I pulled out of there, just literally slowly going through these, I don't know, whatever, like 20,000 records, 10,000 records just on the ground, was there's a white label called KJAM 003, I think I've mentioned before, that's gone for like 300 pounds. That's like just a really random thing where the fact that it goes for big money wasn't really what made it special. It was more just something that I never would have found online, almost for like anything. But the fact that I got to find it there in this random crappy store was super cool. And then another record that like some people who are locked might know, or that certainly you guys might know, that's become really popular is this record Baraka I'll Be There. And I found that in there for like £1 or something, just laying on the floor. At the time, it wasn't that rare, but that one is like a real treasured possession for most people. I just got reissued, and I think it sold the most of almost any old jungle record that's been recently put out. I think they topped out the pressing at like 15 or 1600 copies. Wow. And the reason for that, I mean, it's a really cool tune, and it's like a tune you can play. Anyone who hasn't heard much jungle and will like, just because it has a really memorable melody. But something weird happened with it where someone posted it on YouTube. This guy I know, Ricky Law, and YouTube algorithms kicked in, and for whatever reason, anytime you Google anything about drum and bass or jungle on YouTube, when autoplay kicked in, this one track, Baraka I'll Be There, would always be the next track that played afterwards. So without even wanting to get into it, it was like better publicity than a million promotional companies, better publicity than like BBC playing your track. It was like way more powerful than any of that. Just by virtue of people sitting there listening to other music online, everyone became obsessed with this tune and had to have it. And so that's a record that I found for like a fucking £1 or something. So that's certainly a special one to me.
Can we go into some stuff about labels that I'm interested in?
Yeah, sure. Of course, man. So anything I know, I'm happy to share.
The biggest question that I have. Well, let's start with a simple one. Sound of the Underground records. Do you just call it Sour? Is that the correct way to pronounce it?
Sour.
Yeah. So so there's this compilation on there called Fourth World Order that I just think is one of the greatest records of all time in any genre. It's really a powerful record, but it's a sub-label that only made one record. And then on top of that, Chatta B and Potential Bad Boy have a record on Redskin, Vibes EP, and on the label it says Respect to Fourth World Order, but it spells it FORTH instead of with the number 4. But I didn't know there was any connection between Redskin and Sour, and I wonder what the concept of Fourth World Order was and why it's a label that only released one record. Do you know any information about this?
Oh, that's really interesting. I don't know the official reason for it. I can definitely tell you that a lot of these labels, certain producers, the ones that you mentioned, so Chatta B, which if I remember right, I just found out more recently was short for Chatterbox. That was his official name. And a lot of these guys, they were all friends and they all had connections. There was connections running through the label. So Sour with some people with Kemet, and then Kemet with Ibiza and Third Party. All these labels had sort of a similar sort of pool of artists sort of working together. Sour ended up being more of its own thing. I'd say they ended up being the more commercial major label aspect of one. Like they really seem to have, like, not to disrespect any of the other labels, because honestly, I'd say arguably I prefer the output on, labels like Ibiza and Third Party. But Sour, I would say, ended up with like less releases, and it was a bit more of a commercial thing, I'd say. Right. That comp's really interesting. I'm looking at the tracks right now to remind myself. Yeah, you're right. I think this happens to be one of these cases. So the fact that it's a sub-label, it could be simply that Sour wanted to put it out, but they wanted to do something a bit more raga jungle, or they wanted to basically do something a bit more underground than they were already doing. So that was a common thing. Honestly, like the main reasons people would do sub-labels and stuff were, number one, is like the same reason people would do aliases. They would either try to create something to distinguish the sound, but also pragmatically speaking, some labels, other labels that were cranking out tons and tons of records, just like certain artists that were cranking out tons and tons of records, like Dillinger or whatever, by creating an alias or something, you're able to sort of break it up and make it not seem like, someone's in the record store and all they see are 30 Dillinger records or like 30 records on Sour or something like that. But yeah, man, this track list is awesome. So Potential Bad Boy and Chatter B are two of the people that go all the way back to the beginning of the style. Potential Bad Boy in particular is like foundational Ibiza Records dude. he, I mean, ended up going on to do really, really cool UK garage afterwards. So he's one of these guys who was, you could tell, came up from the more reggae, soulful side of things. He wasn't just gonna, I mean, I think he did a little bit of drum and bass, but he's always been more into the jungle sound of things. So yeah, Vibes is a wicked track. I could hear it in my head. I'm not gonna embarrass myself by singing the sample, but like that Save the Last Dance for Me sample or whatever, but coming in, but then it's super dark on top. That's like that's the real cool sort of stuff that you could get away with then, is like taking a melodic sample but flipping it with really dark melodies on top and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, and then Bass Selective was
on that Redskin label. It doesn't have, they didn't put out many records, but every single record's fucking great, like, in my opinion.
Yeah.
What were you, do you know anything? I just thought that was strange that there was a shout out to that Sarah record on the, but I guess that's from Potential Bad Boy or something. I don't know. Oh shit!
Internet problem. Hello?
I got disconnected for a second.
The internet got weird.
We hear your audio but not your video.
Okay, let me see if I can get this back. Tap to change. Let me, you know what? Oh, here we go. Okay. Let me get this filter nonsense off. Yeah, Redskin, they did quite a lot of tunes. I think, if I remember right, the guys behind Studio 2 might have, which were like the main artists on there, might have had a studio or something. And that's definitely something that you would see, sort of like what I mentioned with the MC Duke thing, is that there were definitely some people who were holdovers even from the early UK hip-hop scene or were producing house and stuff, where when they got into producing this stuff, they sort of had an edge up because they already had production shops or something. So, I mean, and then also just having, I assume they had probably a good background in reggae. So just like the sample picking is impeccable, you know, versus like, I don't know, some random suburban kid who would be a bit more limited in terms of what he could grab. But yeah, I'm just looking at the Redskin list right now, and it's crazy. I guess I should mention that Kemet Records, which is a similar sort of label, they've been doing that guy, one of the main guys from the label, this guy Mark, has been doing tons of reissues of almost every single really rare record. Oh, hey, Phoenician Snares. What's up, Aaron? We should probably take a second and say big shout to Aaron in the chat.
John's wearing his shirt.
Yeah. Oh, ooh, I didn't even notice that. Sick. That's cool. Yeah. At some point, maybe you should tell your story about how, because that's also sort of indirectly how we sort of met through the Transitive property, John, through Aaron, basically. Because I still think that's kind of funny. But yeah, I mean, with Redskin and Kemet, I don't know, man. They were just they absolutely killed it.
Oh.
Oops,
wait, we thought we lost you.
Okay.
So, are you there? We can hear you.
Yeah, can you guys hear me still?
Oh, we can hear you, yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So what were you saying about Kemet?
Yeah, just that the main guy who, one of the main guys at Kemet, this guy Mark, he's been repressing almost every major, not just Kemet releases, but a lot of the rare white labels and mystery releases that these guys did. And it's cool because you know how many white labels there are from the time, like Mystery Jungle ones, that all it would have is just like a picture of like a cat on it, and it would be called Black Cat 001, and there's no words, no text, no nothing. And like a lot of those, you know, ended up going for like a couple £100 or something. There's a lot of those records where no one knew who they were, and then just recently, this guy, because he's part of the Kemet crew, and he knows like Redskin Records and Ibiza and all these guys. He has access to his buddies are going through their DATs, and they're like, oh yeah, that was written by Chada B, or that was written by Studio 2, or that was written by Neil Redskin. And I'd say that's happened maybe 4 or 5 times now or something, where it's just a long, long time mystery. No one knew what it was, and just literally 6 months ago, you learn who it is because this dude from Kemet is reissuing it.
Wow. And then, okay, so another question would be, you mentioned the third party has Straight to the Bedroom, which only has, what, 3 releases? And they're great. Yeah. And I'm wondering, like, what was the concept for Straight to the Bedroom? Like, why is it separate? Is it?
That's a good question, man. The only thing I remember is without check. I was gonna go check on Discord. I'll freeform it. If I remember right, the Straight to the Bedroom ones were more compilations that had like various artists on it. So it could have been like, as opposed to full label things, just a chance for different artists to do it. And it's weird, like I would want to make assumptions and say some bullshit about how it was more experimental tracks or more homebrew stuff. But realistically, I don't think that's the case, because some of the biggest anthems on that label came from those Straight from the Bedroom records, as you know. Like that first Straight from the Bedroom is absolute killer through and through and has some of the biggest jungle tunes on it.
Right. And then Lucky Spin, which is one of my favorite labels, has Intellective and has DJ and also Pure White, which and I was wondering if you knew of anything about the distinction between those labels, why they were separate labels, if there was a concept behind them.
Sure. I can speak a little bit better to this, even though I wasn't there and I don't know the dudes, just because my good buddy Lee used to work at the Lucky Spin shop, this guy DJ Harmony, and so like he's told me a bit over the years about some stuff. And I mean, basically, you have like almost two parallel labels. There was a store called Lucky Spin, and you had two parallel labels, Lucky Spin and DJ. The store was owned by two brothers, like Sasha and Justin Cohen, and one of them ran DJ and one of them ran Lucky Spin. If, in terms of the output and stuff like that, maybe if you talk to them, they would talk about some sort of brand distinction. I personally don't hear it or see it in terms of the sound. I think they both just put out tons of wicked good quality stuff. They sort of ran in similar circles of artists and friends and stuff. People like Lee Harmony or like Trace or in Orca, people like that. And obviously, like with one of the unifying things for them was a lot of those guys were using Pete Parson to do their engineering, which really helped give it a certain sheen and a certain almost like cohesive sound to it, which I guess honestly you would see at a lot of labels. So like, you know, I think Moving Shadow had a studio where someone could go do stuff. Sub-Bass used to have a studio that was like, had different people engineer at it, like Jason D. Cruz engineered at it. I think maybe Winston Run Things or maybe Danny Breaks did for a bit. So in terms of Intellective, I meant to ask him about that. It's hard to say. Realistically, it could be one of these things where they just needed an extra offset, or it could be there's a real particular use for it or something. To me, I feel like that comes on the later end of the Lucky Spin sort of story, where it's like more 94, 95, where they were doing stuff up like 92 on and stuff like that. And it has kind of more melodic tunes. But I don't know. It's just another really rough, really cool label, but that also has some of the same informed vibes as their other stuff.
Yeah.
Were there other labels? Yeah, you mentioned Pure White.
Yeah, I have some other questions here. If you know, feel free to say I don't know.
Sure.
But I noticed a really funny thing. Entity Records, which has Third Eye as a sub-label of it, but you have all these records that are two labels at once. You have where like the World of Mysticism is on Upadarta and it's on Entity or something like Origination 5-tracker EP is also on Rude Boy, but it's on Entity. Like, is this one label doing the distribution for another, or what? Because there's a lot of examples of this specifically with that label Entity, you know.
Yeah, so Entity was a big deal. If I remember right, I think they might have done distribution and on press for labels and stuff like that. I actually, one of the records that, here we go. Yeah, my buddy, thank you for still being locked, Ben. My buddy Ben, who just informed me. Entity was definitely a distributor, and that's how that happened. They, not only would they do stuff like that, but there's actually one record in particular that I know some stuff happened to where, I'm going to be putting it out sometime soon, where the record was meant to be, come out on just a small label, and the Entity Records guy literally was there at the record house when they were cutting test presses, and he was literally like, I'll just do it on Entity instead. So every now and then they would do stuff like that. But I think in general, if you look at a disc, but I think in general, the ones that you're talking about on Discogs, John, if you look at if you actually click into the records, a lot of them will say the label name, but then they'll say distributed by Entity Records will be the thing, basically.
Right, but like you're saying, sometimes it's that the original white label was on one label, like Rude Boy or something, and I think that it's the case with the Rude Boy one, and then it actually comes out on Entity, but it's so
exactly. And that makes a lot of sense, because Rude Boy Records was where Photech got his start with this guy Rob Solomon Lexus, and so I could see that was actually Rude Boy Records was a record shop, and so I could imagine that like Entity saw there and started distributing their records, getting them out, and then once they saw that and once he saw how good Rob and how good Photech was, basically he like wanted to start a label and put more of his shit or something. That would certainly make sense.
Right.
Yeah, there was a lot of big distributors like that where it's like another big one to mention, who I know old school artists aren't so happy about, was one called Jack in the Box that had some, you'll see a lot of distributors in the box. And they had something interesting happen years ago where they folded really abruptly. They like shut down, they owed a lot of people money and stuff, and it was like gone forever. And then maybe some amount of years ago, you know, someone will tell me in chat, maybe my buddy Ben, because he was able to get some of it. Someone uncovered a shack in the middle of nowhere, England, just full of their old records that they had never sold from the early 90s or something. And so some collectors basically go out there and just root through this massive shack of like, with God knows what in it, and find all these old records that they had meant to distribute. Some of which, because they folded so suddenly, there's like a few records that they had taken almost all the copies of, that because they folded, they didn't do anything with them. So it's almost like the record never came out. And then there were those in the shack or something. Oh, shit.
Wow. Sorry,
Ben's mentioning that was Great Asset, that folded quickly. Yeah, there was a big Great Asset warehouse. I'm pretty sure Jack in the Box had some old stock too or something.
Great Asset.
Great Asset.
Yeah, Great Asset was a major. That's one if you go check on Discogs, it's up on 1 million billion.
Crazy.
Right. But yeah, that was another one that I noticed, was that there's a record called Third Eye Special, and it's Redskin on one side and it's Third Eye Records on the other side. Just like, I was like, what the hell? Like the label is a different label for one label on one side and another label on the other side.
Yeah.
But I guess is one label, what's the connection?
I know. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. If I remember, is that like Potential Bad on that record, or Sky Juice or someone like that, or
yeah.
It's
Potential
all the guys
Bad
on that
Boy.
record are basically, it's, you know how I mentioned, yeah, you know how I mentioned with like Hemet Records, third party, Ibiza Records, all those crews, all those guys sort of rolled in the same circles, and they were all very heavily connected together. So that's a perfect example of like, with people who are collaborating on tunes and like releasing together and DJing out, why not do a split release or something? It almost didn't matter at the time too much whether it came out on one label or the other, you know, as long as everybody got paid or whatever.
Right.
So I would guess that that's probably what happened with that one. I doubt that there was like anything really intentional about it, but you know, split label releases are pretty cool.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Marcy has a question.
Sure.
When you say that they were pulling stuff from like melodies from techno records, do you mean like Belgian techno or something?
So a lot of so for by 93, 94, I'd say like a lot of well, some Belgian Hoover sounds probably got sampled, though some people did have access to the synths. A lot of Detroit techno got sampled. Tons of early Detroit techno got sampled. Some early UK techno got sampled. It was basically any techno that came out like more than a month before the record was kind of fair game, especially because like there's some degree of sampling within the same scene that happened. You know, every now and then there's certain notorious cases where someone would swipe a breakbeat or swipe something from a track. But by and large, it was because you didn't have the internet and you didn't have everyone aware of who was using what sounds.
Right.
Oh yeah, and my buddy Ben's saying also a bunch of Dutch sounds did get sampled as well, which is fun because eventually some of those guys, the Dutch guys ended up sampling the UK breakbeats a little bit. Like Paul Elstak did a little bit of jungle hardcore stuff where he would sample all the major UK tracks. And I don't know if that was Revenge or what it was. But yeah, it was mostly Detroit stuff, I'd say. And especially Photek and those guys Photek and Alex Reese are two examples where if you listen back to their stuff, they did killer songs and not taking anything away from them. Oh, sorry, Source Direct too. Photek, Source Direct, and Alex Reese would be good examples where if you listen back to the original songs, it's totally brilliant and it is really original music, but in a way they're kind of standing on the necks of giants or something, where you'll hear an unbelievable melody and be like, oh shit, that's just from this 92 Detroit tune or something like that. And it's especially the Source Direct and Photek, I'd never heard them talk about this before, but I think it was Photek, I saw a live stream from him recently where he literally mentioned how they would just have mad sessions with all their techno records, sitting around with it on a turntable, like playing it, slowing it down, speeding it up, trying to get some sort of new sound out of it. And so there was definitely some sort of like genius kind of shit like that. But there's also cases where they would just find an awesome melody and know, this is a techno guy in a totally different scene that probably thinks my music sucks or isn't even aware of this hardcore jungle scene, there's no chance I'm going to get in trouble with this so people would just sample stuff.
Right. I was just reading this book by Pierre Schaeffer where he's first starting to discover the moment where he first starts to discover that a sound is not the same sound. If you slow it down, he records a train and then he plays it at 33 instead of 78, and he's like, it doesn't sound like a train anymore. He's like, there's no tape or anything. He's just doing. A record was the first place that somebody was starting to figure out that shit with, you know. And it's like the late 40s or whatever. It's pretty neat that people are, you know, we're still digging into that crate.
Totally. And that's, I mean, that was a thing in hardcore jungle, like even in DJ sets. One of the things that some of the early DJs like Fabio and Groove Rider and then LTJ Bookham would do is because there was such a need, they sort of, there was a combination of sounds that we've already talked about. That was a cool sound that was like a London sound. I think they kind of realized what that was going to be before there was even enough records for it in terms of like fast break beats and the, you know, house sounds or techno and stuff like that. So sometimes they would literally take like a record made in New York by Frankie Bones or something that had like fat break beats. It was cool, but it was more a house tempo thing, and would just play it at 45. And there's certain notorious tracks that became popular where if you talk to like a jungle fan, if you play them the original song, it sounds wrong to them because they're only used to hearing it played at 45 in sets back then or something.
Right. Do you have anything that you like that guy Dan Donnelly of Suburban Bass? He seems so sharp for a 20-year-old in that little documentary that's on YouTube, you know, like, and they had so many sub labels, you know, like,
yeah.
Does he continue to do stuff? Did he have a point where he got out? Like,
oh yeah, he got out and got famous, or like he was very much a businessman from the jump. I don't know if he like had, you know, if it was just always his nature, if he maybe had his parents helping him out or something, but he was all crazy industrious from day one. In a way, I would compare it to Busy Bee's attitude, but I'd say Busy Bee is way more DIY and is completely self-made, where the stuff that Danny did, I feel like, had way more infrastructure and like stuff sort of, if not given to him, that he had access to more stuff than Busy Bee did, but which basically from the beginning, he ran it in a very business-minded way. And as soon as jungle sort of started to peter out, rather than doing the thing that some people did, which was, you know, like try to continue on and do a drum and bass label, what he realized was there's a major market in compilations and things like that. So he actually created different brands. First, he created brands for doing jungle comps. I'm sure you've seen there's one called Breakdown Records, which did a lot of suburban bass stuff, but then they also did like lots of best of jungle comps. And as much as, even when jungle was popular, as much as like an individual record could sell a ton of copies, those jungle comps sold like ridiculous amounts. Like probably some of them sold maybe like 100,000 copies or something, which is, you know, unheard of for this style of music, you know, crazy to think about now. So he did really, really well doing stuff like that. Once jungle stopped, it wasn't like he was going to be a junglist for life. He was absolutely not that at all. He kept doing those compilations and ended up doing some really popular ones in other genres. Like he did some really well-selling like UK garage compilations and other styles after that, and continued to do these compilations. I think it's a series called Pure or something. And he had like brands for that. I think he like pushed out into doing parties. It was funny, for a long time he moved from the UK and he was living in LA. And it's like living the LA lifestyle, like with like fancy cars and like trying to get into doing movies and stuff like that. He was doing a bit of, he was still doing compilations, but it was more like tech house compilations, you know, on iTunes and stuff. Because obviously the real money in compilations sort of went down once the digital thing hit. So it wasn't really, likely it wasn't that practical to continue along that route, but it still was an avenue. Ever since jungle has become popular again, he's definitely reappeared and is just putting out a million things. I think by virtue of the fact that he ran the label in a really sort of like business-minded way back in the day, he kept really good record of all his stuff. He still had all his old DAT tapes on his label. He still had all the old releases. So unlike some labels, and especially unlike some individual artists who are still into it, but like they threw out their tapes years ago or they lost stuff, he had all his old stuff. So he's very aggressively now putting out lots and lots and lots of releases, like reissues of old tracks that sort of were only on a compilation, but they never came out on vinyl on their own. So now he's doing them all on like individual vinyl records. He just announced like a crazy 6-record box set that's like super huge with lots of unreleased stuff. So yeah, I just think that's down to him as a person and his attitude and the way that it worked. But that's a good example of one of these ones that was like, he definitely had a crew around him. It wasn't just him. He had like this guy, Winston Runtings, who helped run the shop with him, where obviously because it was born out of the shop Boogie Times, that's a great way to hear all the music that's coming in, sort of know what people like, get feedback from the fans, because people are coming in and buying your records. You're getting to see which records they like, which records they don't like, and getting sort of real visceral responses to the records. He had a studio with some really talented people like Jason D. Cruz working there. Danny Breaks, I think, did some engineering and stuff like that. So it was sort of all connected.
Yeah. Somebody I wasn't aware of before you mentioned him, who I've been really into the last couple of years, is Original DJ Vibes.
Love that dude.
Isn't he so good? And yeah, like, so does he just, is his whole career from 91 to 96, or did he continue doing stuff?
That's a good question, man. If he did anything after that, I don't know about that. He's kind of a mystery to me. He's one of these guys that I've been buying his records for 20 years or whatever, but I didn't really pick him out as such a distinctive person until maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, when I started to sort of reach the end of like having almost all his stuff and realizing when you listen to it, it's just crazy distinctive. I think he probably just switched careers after that, or maybe if he did stay in with music, it was either under a different name or it was more of an engineering or some capacity like that. He definitely didn't continue on to a drum and bass career or like a pop career or anything like that under a different name. But man, that's a great example of someone who just popped up and did, I don't know, like 26, 27 records where they're like, they're of the time, but it's so distinctive sounding. It's like certain drum programming that like really does sound like him, and that's almost similar between the records. And I think that was also due to like how fast these guys were cranking the records out. It's not like they were spending 8 months on a tune. So, there was some reusing stuff and overlap and stuff like that, but it's cool because it gives it some consistency and some familiarity between the tunes and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So
do you have any favorites of his or
information about him? Because he seems very mysterious to me.
Yeah, man. There's the only thing I can tell you. I've been trying to find him. If anyone knows Original DJ Vibes, please get in touch. I'm one of like he's one of my absolute favorites, and it also surprised me. I feel like no one really talks about him, maybe because he was so limited. He didn't do a bunch of records on other labels. Like even people like Busy B, as much as he did his own thing and had a million labels and did stuff, he still got stuff out on Suburban Bass and big labels like that. Like Original DJ Vibes, as far as I can remember, didn't really have anything out under any aliases. It was really a distinctive thing. To have that good quality, I mean, sometimes you can imagine someone might be stuck doing that if their stuff wasn't, a similar sound or almost wasn't good enough. That's not the case with him. His tunes were really, really killer and as good as anything on other labels, but it was just like his own thing. Right. The only thing I can tell about him that's a bit crazy is there's one guy that he used to do tracks with, some of his best ones, Pigbag, who is a really well-known, well-respected DJ guy back then, who was like more of a big name back then. You wouldn't hear his name as much now. They did stuff under the name Combination 2. That guy ended up being put in jail for many, many years for some crazy violent crime. So it's an unfortunate situation where listening back to some of the records, you try to figure out like how can you break apart can you break apart what one of the people ended up being versus this thing that was done 20 years earlier and has nothing to do with that. And I'm sure you know that with like in terms of like sometimes when people listen to like Phil Spector records or things like that, there's always that question in your mind.
Right. Cool.
Anyone who knows Original DJ Vibes, please tell him to reach me. I want to meet that guy. I want to talk to him.
Do you know anything about like why there's DJ Vibes from Vibes in Wish.com and then there's Original DJ Vibes? Was there some kind of conflict about the name or ownership of it, or a story about that?
That's a good question. I mean, I would assume it was a little cheeky thing like that. Because I never met Original DJ Vibes, I couldn't ask him, but I bet the fact that he put Original on there, you get to think that like they were both started playing out around the same time, 92, 93, or were playing out. And so original DJ Vibes, saw the other DJ Vibes, was like, fuck that, I was using the name an hour or a year before him, so I'm going to be Original DJ Vibes, just make the distinction, It's such you got to remember that a lot of these people who are doing this were like 15, 16, 17 like these like snot-nosed kids back then. So there a lot of those sort of attitudes were running things, and then you had this interesting situation of these really young, in a way, a lot of immature kids given all this power and money and all this stuff that they're totally not used to. It's like that jungle documentary I'm sure you've seen with like the Source Direct guys who were like looked like they're like 16, 17 years old, all driving around in Porsches or whatever. And it's just so sort of like weird and disconcerting, you know?
Yeah. Well, I guess we
breaks.
What
Favorite breaks.
we talked about that.
Oh, you did. I went.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because you asked me my favorite breaks. I want to ask your favorite breaks though, John, because I know you actually dig into breaks a fair bit.
Yeah, definitely. It's like my favorite thing to do, but yeah,
It's been on a roll lately.
Yeah, I have been
actually.
I've been going crazy.
You know what? Also, if you don't want to answer, I fully understand if you would rather keep some of your favorite secret, because I have the weird thing where I'm.
Yeah, no, it's
No
not that. It's just sometimes my mind goes blank when I'm supposed to come up with an answer for something. Like I really like this Mary Jane Hooper, "I Got What You Want," and that's fucking hard to find. So I don't want to give it any more popularity. But
yeah, I've heard that. Yeah. Some other ones are popping to mind that I forgot to mention. Like a huge favorite of mine from back then is Eddie Bo, "Lover and a Friend,"
which is
like
I just got that. That's great. Yeah.
It's wicked. Oh, talking about like how everyone loves the Amen. There's another big favorite that my roommate Selene, Chris, showed me years ago because he did a track with it that I think came out on Planet Mu. Was called it's called Cold Sweat, but it's not the normal version of Cold Sweat. It's the Brother Williams version of Cold Sweat. And the thing that's fun about it is it's like a live break done from a live recording. I swear, like the actual tones of the drums sound a lot like an Amen to me. And the only problem with it is the way it was recorded. It's just live, and there's someone in the crowd or someone near a mic just screaming their head off the whole time. And I swear there's been threads online of just like hatred directed at the person who was screaming in the background of this break, because you can chop it up and use it, but it just makes it way more noisy than like an Amen or something. And I swear if it didn't have that, it might be as popular as an Amen.
No, I've used that for this. I really love the screaming on that. Like,
oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, like I used it on one of my tunes that's on SoundCloud on that Renoise track stuff.
Oh, nice. Okay.
But yeah, but I thought that was just a live. I'm kind of confusing it with something. I guess I am. Like, yeah, no. Like, I
can find it right now. Who did it? Cold Sweat, brother. It's interesting because obviously Cold Sweat is a breakbeat too, but regular James Brown Cold Sweat has a breakbeat that's totally different from this one. And it's
I'm talking about a live break that has a girl going. Ah!
Oh, right? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, like no. I
don't know. Maybe it is that one.
Cold Sweat that I was grabbing there, but it was just regular.
Yeah. I think that's it's Brother Williams Cold. Yeah, let me see if I got it right here. Let's see.
Which break is that with the girl screaming?
I'm trying to remember. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah,
can you hear it in the background right here?
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about. I use it on one of the tunes on Renoise tracks. Yeah.
Man, I gotta go. I don't know if I've heard that tune. That's just a huge favorite of mine because I love the idea of like digging in a bit deeper and trying to not like being too nerdy about trying to reconstitute an Amen, but trying to figure out like understanding some of the stuff that makes it cool and finding some of those aspects in other breakbeats and stuff like that.
Yeah. But yeah, but yeah, I guess like I've used Scorpio a lot from
nice
and like Black Heat.
That's a good one for sure.
That you thought was like amazing. That was like that you thought could be as good as the Amen.
Did I say that about something?
You said that about something that you got recently.
Oh, really?
God,
yeah.
I wonder what it was. I've been going through so many lately. It's just been out of control.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, like there's a lot that I've used a lot that I just like mixing them up with other things. It's definitely because I don't usually use one break at a time. So like I like that Alvin Cash and the Register Stone thing, even though there's a bass you can get it out of there easily with EQ and stuff, and it's just
exactly
cool
that's
groove,
the trick.
You know?
Sorry, you said bass in the Cash Register? I don't know if I know that.
Alvin Cash and the Registers.
Oh, okay.
Stone thing.
I don't know if I know that one. I'm typing
Oh,
this
it's
in right
cool.
now so I remember. Man, that sounds cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Um,
Yeah, when you grab breaks, do you typically prefer to get like the original, or have you found any of these sort of second? Do you ever listen to hip hop and stuff like that, and listen for the break beats there
uh,
too?
sometimes, and sometimes friends of mine have given me breaks that they got from hip hop, but and I do have a folder of like of breaks from hip hop, but I don't tend to use them. Usually, my favorite thing is to get the first pressing of something and and organize those into folders according to what type of break it is. I have my own ways of breaking down the categories of different breaks and EQing it and putting it through samplers and do doing all
Awesome.
the treating to it that you do to turn it into something. But like, and I just pile them on top of each other, and so
Nice.
oftentimes I find myself a lot of the time going back to the to a lot of my favorite breaks over and over, but a lot of the time it's just like I'll take some from my own. I'll take some from ones that I've recorded myself, some that I got from one friend, some that I got from another friend, some that come from,
Nice.
sometimes I'll take them from rave records. I have a whole folder of breaks from rave records, moments where there's no bass line or anything, and throw one of
Yeah.
those in there, like, yeah, I just like
Awesome.
mixing them all up. So yeah, I've used different breaks at different times for different reasons. Yeah, it's, um, yeah, there's one, some just have like a really good sound like that Odetta, uh, what's
I
it
know the one
called?
you're talking. Is it called Blackbird maybe or something, or is
No,
that a different one?
it's Odetta Hit or Miss.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Ramsey Lewis back in the USSR. That's a
Oh, cool.
yeah, those are really good. There's two in there, and yeah, this yeah, Young Holt Unlimited Rubber. Uh, is it?
Oh, wicked.
Yeah, it's Young Holt. Yeah, Young Holt Unlimited. It's called Rubber Lips. That is, yeah. Young Holt Unlimited Rubber Lips has an amazing sound and it has a tambourine, but it's a
Oh,
different
sick.
kind of
Okay.
tambourine pattern than Think or something, and like that one's really
Yeah.
good. I don't know. I can't
Yeah.
believe
When
how
you
much good music there
yeah,
was around all the, like how many people were doing funk and in the late 60s and early 70s, and the fact that that's the way that they were recording music at that time lent itself so well to sticking the shit through 12-bit samplers and 16-bit samplers and stuff, like where
totally.
you can just turn it into something completely different. Like I just consider it some sort of act of God that like that style of engineering for that short like 6-7 year period or something had this beautiful correlation to the
To another short
to another very short period, like these samplers that
Yeah.
were being used between like 88 and 95 or something. It's just, it's crazy that the two things match up so well. You can pull so many infinite sounds out of those breaks, whereas you take a drum, a drum recording of something now that, sure, it's recorded well, but what can you do to it with a sampler and an analog EQ?
Yeah.
Like nothing, like,
Exactly.
yeah, you could,
Because something recorded now is probably already maximized and already tried to go for it. It's not about like just the haphazard tone of the room it was recorded in. It's literally just about trying to go for a sound. It's like the difference between original jungle, where you had break beats that had timbre or sound to them, like an actual distinct timbre, versus drum and bass, where I feel like for a while drum and bass got crazy, where it was almost a loudness war, where the drums almost didn't even have like tone timbre to them. It was literally just make stuff as loud as possible, get all the frequencies like as loud. And so I'm not saying that all drums sound like that now, but I feel like there's more of an engineering aspect to stuff where, I mean, hell, like a lot of recordings now, people don't even use live drums. They'll like take the drums and then use a drum replacer to replace like track by track or whatever. So,
yeah.
who knows what you're hearing.
Yeah, and it's a lot of close miking, and it was even though people use room sounds, like the room sounds on the recordings with the breaks, those room sounds weren't being recorded because they were trying to get a room sound. They were trying to record the horn section, or they were trying to record the guitar or the bass or something.
Exactly.
You ended up with this unintentional room thing with maybe one or two mics on the drums, and it's just like it leaves all this air in the music that can be turned into a zillion different things. Whereas you got the snare right up against your ear and the kick drum right up against your ear because the mic was inside the fucking drum. Like, it's got no air. You can't do anything to it. Whereas you can pull a zillion different vibes out of something like the Amen break, because where all the elements came together perfectly, where like the groove of the drums are so perfect, the tuning of the acoustics of the room is so perfectly aligned with the tuning of the drum set, and it's just like you get this thing that can become a zillion different. I feel like you can. An Amen can sound like more different instruments than a guitar can. Like, almost, it's in that same category in my mind.
No, you're saying for sure.
Yeah.
There's major happy accident stuff with the way it was recorded. I think is what you're saying.
Yeah.
In terms of just it's just so many more organic sounds in there that are sort of unintentional, where it's not just the drums or anything like that. I just remembered one more. I almost don't want to give it away because I sampled the shit out of it on the Evar record. Basically, it's basically my go-to thing now is this with an Amen on top, which is it's DJ Food, like the Ninja Tune guy. He did a bunch of records called like jazz breaks. That was like sort of like almost the hip hop thing of like combinations of but there was almost more like break montages and cool stuff like that. And he had one called Black Ice. That's this cool ridey thing. I actually don't know what the component breaks are. I'm sure it's listed somewhere online. It was only used in a couple of jungle tunes, but to me, it just has this crazy high-end energy edge to it, where if you take something like that and have some other like more low-end break and you sort of fuse those together, it just becomes it fills out the spectrum the same way that like a good engineered Amen would or something like that.
Right. Yeah, this Cold Blood Shop Talk, that's a really good break too. I know.
Oh, nice. That sounds cool just from hearing it through the speaker. I don't know that one at all. You guys are going to have to like send me a list of a couple of these when we're done.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious what you were saying about how you like to layer breaks. So do you do that all within the S950? Like, do you bring the raw breaks in there and then do you like sequence the stuff out, the break layers in there, or?
No, first I pitch them and time them in Renoise, and pitch them separately from the tempo and stuff, and sometimes in SoundForge, and then I run them through a analog EQ and analog compressor, and then I run them through the S950, and this is one break at a time, and then I sort of put them in Renoise and put one on one track, and if I like it, and then pick another break and do the same thing to that one, and I start piling them up, and I usually do it. I have a melody that I'm not going to use for the song, but it's just a melody to sort of keep me in time and to sort of keep the drums in a common kind of tuning. So like sometimes the cymbal or the snare, anything that has a pitch to it, I'll like maybe one break I'll hear the note A, but if my melody's in the key of A minor, then like another drum break sort of has the note C in it, the way I tune it and stuff. So like they all sort of, the drum breaks wind up all sort of harmonizing with each other in a way. And then I just, every time I come up with a combination I like 5 or 6 breaks that I think are going really good together, I render that and I name it, and that becomes one break. And I just keep doing it with different combinations until I've got like 100 of them at that tempo. And then I make a tune. Yeah, like out of the best.
That's so cool, man.
We've
never talked about this before, even when we've hung out. And like what you described is exactly what I do, like aside from some of the steps of running it out of the box. But like the whole way I did the Evar record was basically I had a fat folder of like all the days where I wasn't making music, where all I could make myself do is I would just like run through a lot of my favorite breakbeats and try combining stuff in different ways, and literally would just save off hybrid breaks of like 3 or 4 different breaks on top of each other. And so by sort of doing the groundwork that you just mentioned ahead of time, when you go to write the song, it's like the creativity, you don't have to do that and come up with the other thing at the same time. And that's like the one good thing I learned from Tim Reaper, who does more music than anyone I know, is like, if you really want to be successful and like be happy with getting good stuff done, a big part of that is like pre-production or just building up a framework for yourself. So when you want to be creative without too many impediments or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when I was doing that Maya record, I would spend like 3 weeks preparing to do a tune, just making DX7 patches and making break beats, and then just a few days of making a tune or a week of making a tune, whatever. But like the making the tune part was just, there was no legwork involved. It was just like smooth, you know. But yeah,
Yeah.
like it that sometimes it can be as creatively stimulating to do that legwork actually as the rest. Does Tim Reaper, does he like, he has breaks like ready to go in every single tempo
Hey, are you
and
still there?
sort of type of break you could possibly want at that tempo or something?
Say that one more time. I think your stream, I don't know if it cut out for other people, but I saw it was buffering for a second.
I was just asking, does Tim Reaper, he has breaks just ready to go at every single
Oh,
tempo,
yeah.
every type of break you could possibly want to use? Like,
Well, I mean, I don't know if he has it all perfectly timed to a certain tempo, but because he's bringing it into a modern DAW, like I think
yeah,
still uses Fruity Loops for most stuff, like an older version. He has he has very impeccably organized. Here's all the breakbeats I want sampled from different sources, sort of like sampled from old jungle records, sampled from original hip hop tunes, sampled from rare groove stuff, and then he'll have here's all these melodies from crazy old techno and trance. Maybe I don't know if he goes and does his own custom stuff. He might do that, and but he has loads and loads of different directories of like all the components that you would want. And so pretty much every time I used to go
yeah,
over to the UK, we would bang out tunes, and some of them I brought over and did some of the fundamental samples for, but I kind of felt bad about it because at some point you work with people who are that organized and they're just so fast with it that I almost felt like a jerk, like I had to slow them down and be like, no, I had to really work to inject myself in it. But he's able to do it just because if you have all the components and you already know you like stuff, it's like having an awesome playground, and then it feels frictionless to sort of like build something out of it.
yeah. Um, do you have anything you want to say about any current jungle that stands out that you like, or other than Tim Reaper?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, for people who are locked who don't know me or know, there's a guy named Tim Reaper that's really blown up over the past year. He's been a really, really good friend of mine. I'd say maybe one of my best friends, which is weird because we didn't even meet for like the first 4 or 5 years of knowing each other. Like, I had no idea what he looked like or anything like that. But we were just like both obsessed with old school jungle and talking online. But he's quite popular for jungle now. He's sort of at the forefront of people doing stuff that sort of sounds like 94, 95, but that's sort of just tweaking the edges a little bit and definitely not ripping off the old stuff. So in previous years, there would be people who would try to do throwback jungle, and all they would really do is sort of like recreate an old jungle song or like steal a big melody from a jungle song. He's not doing that. He's not taking big chunks of like the big old jungle songs. He's like sort of from the ground up doing the same sort of sampling that the old guys were doing from some of the same sources, but not always the same samples, often different samples that are similar, like the same kind of rare groove stuff, but not the same rare groove sample. And he's like putting that in there. Other than him, there's a guy Sully that everyone knows about that's really cool and distinctive just because for better or worse, not really worse, but I really appreciate the fact that even with music, a music style that's very, very narrow in terms of its scope, and there's not a lot that you can do with jungle that doesn't become something else. Like if I chop my breaks too much, no one's gonna even call it jungle anymore. It's gonna be IDM, or it's gonna be IDM jungle, or it's gonna be breakcore. So, and there's like not a lot of room. Sully guy has tunes where guy is Phineas Phineus number 2, and
Yeah,
he's been producing for years and years and years. I used to be on like message boards with him like 10-15 years ago. He went under a different name, and he's a hardware guy like you, John. He's got like loads of old S950s. He does lots of stuff on Amiga. It's all, I think, driven by an Amiga. And for years and years, he didn't put out any records, he didn't really do anything. He would just post tons and tons of videos of himself on YouTube, like not low rent, like lo-fi, look like old VHS tape videos of just him, just some random dude hunched over like a wall of this like homebrew gear setup and just dancing, like bouncing around to his tunes and show like, oh, a synth part comes in, so he goes over and turns on the synth or something like that. And that was like the only representation of his tunes. And I think by virtue of him being into it so long and going knee deep and like really mysterious guy, almost no one has communication with him online. My buddy Kenny Kidlib is almost like has been helping some labels because everyone's sort of realized he's such a good talent. It's almost a shame that more labels can't work with him. But just by virtue of him doing hundreds and hundreds of these videos, he's become really ingenious and incredible with his sequencing, to the point where I'd say that some of his production chops and some of the stuff he does almost goes beyond what almost any of the old guys were doing. Not saying he's better than any of the old producers, but just because people back then, I think people working on this music were only working on this particular style of music for like a year. So it wasn't like people had the knowledge of like 20 extra years to like try different things and try to like tweak the edges. But that guy Phineas too, Mikey, he really needles up against the edge and does some stuff that, you know, maybe it even kind of sounds crappy, but then you realize it sounds awesome, or it's like kind of charming and it sounds like it's out of time, but it's totally meant to be out of time. And there's all sorts of cool stuff like that in his stuff. He's a good example when a lot of people don't like the idea of modern jungle because they just think it's a thing that already happened. And it is kind of ironic because when it originally happened, the whole point of it was a future sound. It was a brand new thing, and everyone was trying to progress and do modern stuff. So the idea of people 25, 28 years later trying to make this retro thing kind of flies in the face and almost disrespects the original intensity of jungle drum and bass, which was about doing innovative, forward-thinking stuff. But at the end of the day now, we're living in different times. Everyone can have access to all music at all time. I don't think it really matters. People should make what they want to make. And so, like, with him, I feel like he does actually butt up against those edges and find some new things to do that other people haven't done with the genre.
Yeah,
those are two good examples. Yeah.
I wish people would take from. I wish there were people. I wish I could go out and hear music that was like 1940s jazz and shit like that. You know, like big band music, or the kind of shit you would hear back then in a nightclub, like 30s music, 20s music. There's been so many great periods of music. I think it's a shame when it just dies and you don't hear anybody do anything like that again. So I think it's cool that people keep going with some of these ideas because, I don't know, it's creativity. It's infinite. You can do anything, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think it's very different with the internet now. Think about like the access to music now versus back in the day. Like back in the day, you had very finite sources of who is giving you music and what you owned. It was basically like you'd have to go to a store and physically buy stuff. So you could only have a certain number of things. And you also could only hear about it from the radio and from very fixed amounts of places. Now, people online, especially young kids, it breaks my brain that there's almost no concept. I feel like there used to be, and you probably got some of this, being into underground stuff felt like it had some sort of cultural cachet, like from the late 80s, early 90s. It was like you were kind of a badass if you knew about this sort of thing. And like, by and large, I feel like shit just doesn't exist now because everything being on the internet means it's all on an equal level. Like, I remember being horrified when I saw that, like, Last.fm or one of those sites with my DevNull breakcore shit that I thought was, like, not cool, but I thought it was, like, the most underground, obscure thing. There was, like, a bunch of people who were, like, scrobbly lives and act they like, and then they list the format. And they're like, what? Don't listen to that. Don't listen to me if you're going to listen to... That's not how the world anymore. People listen to everything they want to listen to. So if they want to listen to a brand new hip-hop song on the radio, listen to that. If they want to listen to a song from 25 years ago, they'll listen to that. If they want to listen to a brand new song that sounds jungle, they'll listen to that. And there's no concept of, not much of a concept anymore of strict genre and brand loyalty to just the current thing that's happening, I think.
Right.
Well, man, I don't want to take much of your time. That's cool, though. We definitely went way beyond what we thought we were going to go there. Was there any other stuff you wanted to ask me or any stuff like you wanted to say, actually? Or
No, I you know, like there's always stuff I'd be interested in asking you, but I feel like we covered a good range of stuff. I don't know. I covered the basic questions that I had written down.
Cool. Yeah.
And some of it's like questions that were inspired by your website where, like, I think if anybody's interested, like, they can go to your website, like Blog of the Old School. It's a great place to learn about unusual things like jungle that was made outside the UK. Like, I could ask you, you know, do you have any standout jungle from outside the UK? But you've talked about that on your site, you know, like, so there's
one I did of only international jungle, like only tracks from other countries. Actually, I should mention before we go, because I kind of cut myself in terms of talking about new artists. There's a couple of other people like that I think really like I should mention, which is not, I don't want to just big up my friends and stuff, because that's, and I was trying to hold myself back because of that, but really some people that are doing special stuff is like Marlon, this guy Equinox from Scientific Wax, who like some people might know, especially if, you probably know him from the Planet Muse stuff or whatever. He's an absolute trooper for this music. He's long before jungle was popular again, back to like years ago when people were only buying like 100, 150 copies of records. Because like Paradox, he was really focused on a certain type of thing. Like he literally got to start back in 92 working with Busy Bee when he was like 13, 14 years old and was just obsessed with, they didn't even call it music, they called it science, which was all about just like the beat wizardry, the beat experimentation and shit like that. And so he's kept doing it all this time and he's still doing really good stuff. But more importantly, he doesn't produce that much now, but his label Scientific Wax is like one of the, probably I'd say the best respected bar none in terms of jungle. Every release they do sells out in a couple of days. And it's not because he's like trying to do, some labels that they press like 100 copies and they make it like a fake exclusive thing. No, he keeps trying to press more and people keep buying it. And he's only conservative about it because he was around in these dark ages where like distros ripped everyone off and like where you would only sell like 200 copies of a record. But finally, like his label is getting some recognition, and some of the people on his label, like this guy Dub One and Nebula, are doing this really choppy style of jungle drum and bass called, I guess people just call it choppage, which is interesting to me because it's almost like reaching the levels of like an Aaron, like a Venetian snares, but it just has a very different feel to it. Like the flow is different. Aaron has more of a anarchic, like really speaks to me in my heart ever since he started doing it back in the day. Feel of like how like this and that, I don't even know what the right term, how jarring it can be, like jarring to a certain effect. But these guys, it's more meant to be sort of in a groove, but then it actually does get quite dicey at the same time. So there's a weird sort of tension and balance to it. So that label, yeah, Equinox and
yeah.
so the artists on his label are Dub One and Nebula are the two main ones, and then he does do some stuff from Tim Reaper and other people too. But yeah, Scientific Wax, and there's a sub-label Scientific Wax Retro that are cool. And also my buddy Harmony, Harmony is a good person to mention. I don't want to turn this into a spam thing. I see I'm scaring people away. I do want to mention him because DJ Harmony, you have some of his records on Lucky Spin, right, John? Like, you know his stuff.
Yeah, Harmony and Extreme, right? That's the same?
Exactly, yeah. Harmony and Extreme was like him and a girl he knew at the time that were producing together. So he's a back in the day name that was around from like 92 on. And very few artists who were doing that stuff back then got back into it. I can't think of almost basically any other artist that got back into it and is doing something now that really stays 100% true to the old vibe to the point of even being mixable with the old records. And I feel like he's just totally nailed that. He went from like running his label, because he kept kind of close to music, like even in years when he wasn't producing, he was like selling records secondhand. I got to know him because he was buying and selling major DJs collections. So he would buy a big UK DJs collection, then sell off the records one by one. So he'd sell stuff to me. And so he's producing now, and his like the quality of his production is really, really high, but it's not so high that it doesn't sound like totally aseptic to the point you can't mix it with jungle. It works perfectly with jungle. It's just like a bit more modern and clean, and like it goes well in a mix, especially if you have kind of a rusty track and you want to sort of like clean it up a bit. It's like a cool thing to mix in.
Right. Anybody else you wanted to mention?
I feel bad just shouting. I've had Kid Lib's another person like Phineas too, who does a lot of retro stuff. He runs a label called Green Bay Wax. That's like, again, was one of these labels that did very low numbers, and now all their stuff is really popular. Most famously, I think one of his tunes got played by Aphex Twin in a set, and everyone was freaking out trying to figure out who it was. And I think some people even thought it was me just because they heard me play like a remix of it or something. But I can admit it. I wish it was me, and it wasn't me. I may have led some people to believe it was me, but I never like exploited it or anything. But yeah, he's another quality producer that just spends tons and tons of time like Harmony producing. He gets way more retro, more like Phineas too, where he does lots of 8-bit stuff on the Amiga, but he also has newer stuff too. He loves hip hop, so I've heard tracks he's done in Ableton that also have a cool vibe to them that are just a bit cleaner and stuff like that.
Right.
Cool.
And your Pocket Operator, that's 8-bit, correct?
Yeah, it's 8-bit, 11,000 kilohertz, so not the full 24,000 kilohertz, and it's strictly mono, and it uses some weird waveform encoding that's like not the typical, it's not the regular PCM. I forget what it is. Like, I think it's called ULOG, and for some reason, I guess when it's trying to bring the data down to that 11,000 hertz 8-bit, it sounds just a little bit different to me than if you say sample it into an Amiga or something. But it's the same sort of vibe that like, it's the same way bringing it into your S950 gives it a certain tone, for better or worse. Yeah. Bringing stuff into this kind of gives it a certain tone.
Yeah. It's cool. Yeah, so for people out there who don't know, Pete's new record is on
today.
Evar Records.
It's out today.
It's out today. Today's the release date.
Yep.
Oh yeah. You know, the Evar Records Bandcamp and grab it. Ben said something to me about Evolute years. I don't know what that was. It was probably an answer to something we were talking about that we didn't know the answer to, but whatever. Anyway, thanks for taking the time for this, John. Apologies to any of John's fans who didn't get the memo and thought that it was going to be mostly him talking the whole time. Hopefully this was interesting to some of you. I mean, I was personally interested to hear what John had to say, so I tried to ask a little bit too, because honestly, like, I don't want to interview. I would rather have a conversation with someone in just like the same way that we talk normally. So I feel like this was kind of that.
A conversation.
But I guess that's it. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks so much, Pete. Really appreciate it, and always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks, and hopefully I do get to see you guys sometime in the near future. It's only been a couple of years now.
So, it's the time of the year for you to come to Los Angeles, enjoy this fair weather.
Yeah, I am going to be looking into maybe renting a place. I'll let you guys know for sure if I'm thinking about going out there, because it's like 40 degrees here today, and that's not the one.
That's not true.
It was 70 yesterday, and it's 40 here now.
Hey, let me just say now, just in case my fans, leave Pete alone. Don't take questions about me, okay?
I appreciate it.
Jungle, though. Fair game.
Yeah, ask him
Fair
anything
game
about breakbeat hardcore jungle.
Yeah.
Right,
I don't mean any disrespect by it too. I appreciate it for sure. Thanks a lot, guys. Really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Pete.
See ya. Bye, everybody.
See you guys.
Out there. See ya.
Bye, everyone.